Today on CityCast Chicago. Look, we all reading the news every day, and honestly, I don't know about you, but I could use a laugh. Luckily, we live in the comedy capital of the world, so I've invited one of my favorite stand-up comedians to give us her guide to comedy in Chicago. I'm talking the spots to check out, some hidden gems, and what to do when your friend inevitably invites you to one of their musical theater improv shows. It's Thursday, November 21st. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Sonal Agarwal is a stand-up comedian, an actor, a performer, a storyteller. I have watched her perform across the city hosting shows. Sonal, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
What's up? How y'all doing? How are you, Jacoby?
I'm so excited to have you here. You seriously, between karaoke storytellers, between the shows you've put on, hosting the Moth in the city, I've gotten to watch you perform so many times. What's your favorite thing about doing comedy in Chicago?
My favorite thing about doing comedy in Chicago is absolutely the power of the word and a joke, and kind of the immeasurable impact of sending your energy out in this live format and in a space, in a place like Chicago that is so coveted for comedy and for live performance and for actual human interaction. And really one of my favorite things is just people that you think that you don't know that are actually like, I know you, and will come up to you after the show or come up to you at a different show that you're not even on and be like, hey, listen, I saw you and you were funny.
So how long have you been doing comedy in Chicago, and how have you seen things change over that time? I mean, especially given, we had a whole ass pandemic that took people off the stage for years.
I started in 2016. Obviously, the social media aspect of it has completely shifted the game. Now you've got clips going viral and people going on tour who don't necessarily have the time and experience to back the number of followers that they have.
Like the scene has shifted from just like being in a comedy club, being in improv with people who are taking improv classes, people are hitting the comedy circuit. And now you have a mixture of people who have cut their comedy chops, making skits online, streaming online, and now maybe are coming into the physical space and have changed things in a way, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's talk about a few recommendations across the city. Where are some of your favorite places, not only to watch stand up, but to perform?
Obviously, I got to shout out the Lincoln Lodge, which is a DIY run space, and it's a non-for-profit. So it's not following a club format, which just means, I love the Laugh Factory. Zanies is putting on great shows all the time. Comedy Bar is a great spot if you are downtown. You got a lot of tourist traffic. They have a beautiful upstairs patio. The difference is, especially at Zanies or Laugh Factory, there'll be a 2-drink minimum. A lot of that money is going to maintain the club. And at Lincoln Lodge, it's kind of like the guy that runs the Lincoln Lodge has a full-time job outside of running the Lincoln Lodge.
How often do they put on shows, and they're bringing in like local performers? Are these open mics? What makes Lincoln Lodge special to you?
Not only are they putting on shows 6 to 7 days a week, they have a pretty full show schedule, and they're also doing classes and workshops and community organizing. And I teach little high school workshops through an organization called Embark, where kids are basically on a field trip going to a comedy club and roasting us, and then we're like, great, now do it on stage into a microphone.
And let's put a little technical proficiency behind it.
Exactly. You can roast. I do look like a weird substitute science class teacher. Fine, whatever. Do it into these lights.
So the Lincoln Lodge in Logan Square off Milwaukee and Armitage, one of your favorite spots. What's another spot that you love across the city to perform or host at?
The Den Theater has been hosting some very cool acts from all over the world. There's this woman, Sindhu V, who she's a British Indian stand-up, and she's in the show called The Pradeeps of Pittsburgh on Amazon Prime. I've been tracking her for years, and she just did, like it's still almost magical to me because it's like, oh my God, this is somebody that I've known for so long, and she's a real human being that is also touring and performing her craft. And you need to be able to have accessibility and buy a ticket. There's Facebook groups for the Den to be able to volunteer to be an usher, for example. Speaking of
That's dope.
accessibility, yeah. So if you're like, I can't afford to go, but I really, really want to see her, you can find the resources to get yourself into these shows, hopefully.
They got Adam Burke filming a comedy special there this week. They got the latest night of comedy at the Den Theater, as well as Carter Anderson.
They have Kristen Toomey filming her special. She's a Chicago fan favorite. She's so fantastic. One of my best friends, Osama Basal, is recording a special on Friday. It is with Ian Abramson.
Kristen Toomey and Osama Basal both on Friday. They got a packed calendar.
Yeah. And I mean, the theater itself is beautiful, and then there are so many DIY spaces, and that I think is a big shift. There used to be more, bookstore and salon and comic book store basement shows before the pandemic. I feel like we're seeing that less, but then again, there's an abundance of shows in the back of, there's a cooking show. I think the episode will have already come out, but there's Professor Pizza. He's like a Chicago guy that has restaurants now that started as pop-ups, and he would just bring pizzas to comedy shows. And now he has a place right next to Second City. And he's going to be doing a cooking competition show called Sauteed Stand-Up, where they get stand-up comedians cooking and doing stand-up. It's so chaotic. And then they have they have professional chef judges, judging the competition. And so people will get like a little tasty treat, and then it's very stressful. It's for the performers, for the audience. I think it's really fun.
So you mentioned the Den in Wicker, which was further down on Milwaukee, closer to Paulina. I mean, you mentioned these type of unique comedy shows that are happening in places across Chicago. What's one of the unique comedy shows you've performed in?
Sauteed Stand-Up is so unique, and that's actually usually hosted at the Lincoln Lodge. There's a show called What Could Go Wrong at the Laugh Factory, produced by my friend Dan Cass, and that's really chaotic. They had like a staged blackout, and suddenly there's a guy posing. I'm doing air quotes right now for our listeners. There was a dead body on the stage, and that's a comedian. And then they did like, it's a murder mystery in the middle of the comedy show, and they're like, lock the doors, everyone's a suspect, and I was like, is this funny? Or are people
has this gone too far?
Confused? And then they're going back to the DIY space. Like, I produce a show at a space called Nabala Cafe, which is a Palestinian owned and run cafe, and that is very much laughter as a form of healing, and we call it comic relief because they were actually a victim of some hate crimes. They've had some windows smashed.
Nabala Cafe up in Uptown.
Yeah, the community response has been overwhelming, actually. So it is like, people want to support, people want the causes that they believe in. And even when we proposed the show to Iyad, the owner of Nabala Cafe, he's like, I don't know if that's really the vibe right now. And I was like, I think it's absolutely the vibe. My friend brought her parents, which is always intimidating to have like an Indian dad in the audience who you can only tell that he's laughing if you're watching the wrinkles in his eyes, because he's not like, ha 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 ha, in the traditional sense of laughing. He's like really paying attention. But the comics were getting a little stressed. They're like, can we get this Indian uncle out of here? And I'm like, no, he's having a great time. Because I think the difference also in a theater setting is that you're used to being on stage and there are lights on you and you can't really see the audience. Of course, you're doing some crowd work, maybe, if that's your style, and you're more talking to the people in the front and you're addressing the fact that you can't see people versus in a cafe where we're just setting up, a construction light or something. You can very much see the audience.
The venue you're in and how that space can impact the overall show is an interesting concept. Like, what's the weirdest space you've ever seen or done stand up?
I think maybe sometimes when it's like a really loud brewery where there's machinery on brewing things. and there's
like
also
such a specifically Chicago problem.
yeah, such a Midwest thing. To
Let's go to the comedy open mic down at the brewery.
And there are IPAs being brewed in real time, and there's a machine that's like, and there was a guy doing there's the Kibitz Nest up on Clybourne, and that's like a internet free game and bookstore, and that's they have a theater space in the back, and that's very cool. That actually is kind of a normal showroom space, but the show there is great, and that's, but I anywhere where there's like a restaurant or kind of a space where people aren't necessarily there for the stand-up is always a challenge. You can't treat stand-up like a band. You can't just be like talking full volume.
Sometimes when, speaking of a like uniquely feels like Chicago Midwest thing, like sometimes people will say, let's go see a comedy show, but they really need to clarify if they mean stand up or they mean improv. So for people who listening who may not immediately clock the difference, what are the basic differences between going to see stand up and going to see improv?
Gosh, it's like the deep dish versus thin crust debate, Jacoby, like,
tell me more.
These are hills that people will die on. Improv comedy is following, a different format where it is made up on the spot. And, you for me as a stand-up comedian and as a consumer, I'm like, oh my God, what dimension of hell have I entered?
Right, because improv is not only made up in the spot, often groups of people, but their audience participation is welcomed. It's sometimes needed to develop the show.
And disclaimer, I've seen some amazing improv, and there are some great groups, at the Second City. And I think it's fair for me to say that it can be hit or miss, and it can be like, okay, this is a little bit painful, and maybe this is more like for you guys. And in the same breath, I will say I have seen some gloriously bad stand-up, which is almost also really special. Because what do people see on the TV? They see a special. If we're recording a special, there's going to be all these different camera angles, and it looks like it's really popping. And, you're getting like the movie version of a stand-up comedy show generally on TV. But to be in the room when it's a 50-seater and there's only 10 people in the audience and whoever is on stage is not only bombing, but having an emotional breakdown, that can be so special. There can be something so gloriously uncomfortable. Like this is bad. This is really, really bad.
So when we're talking about these differences between improv and stand-up, you talked about like that tension between deep dish and thin crust. Is there a unspoken or spoken rivalry or like real tension between improv comedians and stand-up comedians? Because when I think of people in Chicago, I know people who have done both.
We hate each other.
But is there like factions here?
Absolutely. There are people who are like, I just like pizza. I love cheese and I love dough. There are people who just like pizza and are doing improv and are doing stand-up. And then there are people who are vehemently, I am a stand-up comedian. I do not do improv. I do not work well in a group setting. And then I think there are a lot of improvisers who would like to do stand-up and are intimidated by the idea of being on stage by themselves.
That's a good point. Do you have any places besides Second City that you enjoy or that are well known for doing good improv in the city?
There's a little space that's just owned and operated by some improvisers up north called Logan Square Improv. And of course, The Annoyance. The Annoyance is also a great place if you want to take some classes in improv. Improv is a skill that I think that should be taught in school. I think that everybody should have some exposure to improv. I think making your mind open to the concept of yes and uplifting your scene partner. I think there are a lot of principles of improv that can be applied to your everyday life and, to regular social interactions. And I think a lot of improv games can be brought into a party setting, and I know there are people who are probably cringing as they're hearing me say that. They're like, God, just kill me if somebody tries to get like a zip zap zop going at a dinner party. But, in a sense, if you've ever done like a murder mystery night or something, like that's doing improv. So guess what? You're a dork.
If you were to suggest for someone, like if they were looking at the Revival in South Loop for improv, or if they were looking at IO for improv, would you suggest somebody who might be interested in getting on stage to do comedy, starting with improv where there's a group setting, some training, or stand up where they're sort of by themselves? Which would you suggest someone?
I mean, we can go back to the pizza metaphor. If somebody's never had pizza before, would you tell them to start with deep dish or with thin crust?
Probably thin crust. Probably thin crust, right? I'm not going
to really? You wouldn't be like,
we're
going straight to Connie's pizza. Connie's is such a throwback.
So which is which in this metaphor? So which is which? Stand up is which is thin crust?
I guess I would say that stand up is deep dish, which makes it sound like more people should like improv if improv is thin crust. I guess it would go back and forth. And in terms of what you should do first, I think that everybody should do like an improv intensive, which would be like a week long of doing classes every day to learn about sitting in discomfort, and just the discomfort of like, what am I going to say? I don't know. It's about to be my turn. And oh my God, I want to say something funny and I don't want to say something stupid or offensive, and like it's really valuable to have a space where you can be stupid and offensive, and then you can have a conversation about the impact of your actions, and be held accountable in a contained space instead of, at your brother's wedding and you go and offend everybody in your awesome stand-up comedy speech that you prepared where you roast all your aunties and uncles and no one wants to talk to you ever again.
Great point. Are there any places on the south and the west sides of the city that you like going for open mics or that also host some great comedy shows?
Abby Sanchez and Jaime De Leon do a show in Pilsen monthly called Pilsen Stand Up at Simone's. And the food is awesome there. The show is awesome there. They're both really funny. They've been doing it for a long ass time. Just Niche is always, she'll be doing like pop-ups at the Promontory. And there is, it's so funny, there is a kind of whole suburbs scene of open mics and shows.
What are a few of your favorite suburban locations?
Yeah, Still Not Friday is the name of the show, and it's at a brewery, Two Brothers Brewery in Aurora, and then there's the Comedy Vault in Batavia, which is such an awesome club, and there's CGs, and there's a great resource on Instagram called Open Mics of Chicago. If you type in Chicago open mic comedy, the it'll come up right away, and there's a Google spreadsheet that's open and available to anybody if you want to try an open mic.
They had the TBD open mic, the Big Easy open mic, In the Night open mic, Vines open mic, Word of Mouth open mic, Pint of Laughs open mic. Most people who are listening are ultimately going to be in the audience. So what do you think are some good audience etiquette rules? Like, how can we be good audience members?
Oh my gosh, if you think that you're helping the show by talking to the comedian and talking loudly during the show, that's called heckling, and you're not. I have a really hot friend. I've been embarrassed by her. I'm like, I'm not with her. I'm not with her. And she's the type of person, like, she just gets lit and the comedian will be like, how y'all feeling? And she'll just very audibly be like, really good. And you're like, shut up. Just laugh.
So what about laugh? Like, do you like people who laugh at everything and like over laugh at everything? Does that help you as a performer?
I mean, I love her. That's such a great question because there are sometimes you'll have that laugher. Like I can be that laugher. I feel like sometimes I'm laughing when nobody else is laughing, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'm not laughing when everybody else is laughing. I'm like, do I not get it? And you'll kind of be looking around like, what are these people laughing at? And you will have laughers that their laugh is such a kind of shocking bird of paradise laugh that it's a different challenge, the comedian. And there are comedians who can really handle that and make it so funny, and be like, what is that? And I remember there's a weekly show at the House of Blues, and there was these VIP members that, they're not necessarily there for the show. They're just there. And there was a guy in the audience yawning. So he was like, oh. And a lot of the comedians were getting really tripped up by him. And it's such a delicate dance because you don't want to be like, security, can we get rid of the sleepy guy? Because then, the audience is like, uh-oh. And the comedian is this guy, Blake Burkhart, who is a Chicago fan favorite, and he finally got on stage and he's like, the yawny guy's like, oh, and he's like, oh my God, what is that? Did somebody let the cowardly lion into the, and he just kind of roasted the guy. And then the yawny guy is laughing. And then it was so funny. And it was actually one of my favorite moments that I still remember when I'm like, cowardly lion, that's so funny. And when you're able to take something that was infuriating half a second ago and suddenly we're all laughing about it and we remember that and laugh, that's comedy, baby.
If someone sits in the front row, should they expect that they will potentially become a part of the show at some point? And if so, are you like kind of inviting it?
I wouldn't say you should expect it, but you should
Okay.
be open to it and just relax. People act so scared, like, oh no, I'm in what is it, the splash zone or the firing zone, or I mean okay, that could happen in an improv setting, but generally people aren't trying to terrorize the audience, and I feel like there's been a shift where, yeah, you for sure, these are the clips that people are going for where it's like comedian destroys heckler, and goes viral. But I don't know, that hasn't really been my experience. If anything, people are doing crowd work and it's like nice and can be uplifting. And even if you get made fun of a little bit, come on, you're at a comedy show, we're not making fun of you, we're making fun with you.
You suggested to people, between improv classes, between open mics, trying their hand at comedy. How would you suggest someone get started with that?
An open mic is the easiest and most accessible because there is such an abundance of mics, and generally you don't need to buy anything at an open mic. There's no investment rather than the time and the energy of getting there, and you will be surprised by how vulnerable the people around you are, and then you might buddy up and it feels like you're alone, but you're never really alone because especially you make a friend. There's classes, like there's FemCom at the Lincoln Lodge, and I think the best part of that class, besides learning how the structure of a joke and being in a setting where you're getting feedback from your peers, is that generally those women kind of become friends and will start a group chat and we'll start a accountability thing where it's like, we're all going to Kohl's on Wednesday. Let's all go together and let's all be scared together.
Uh-huh. Where can people see you over the next couple of weeks?
Sunday, I'm hosting a show at the Laugh Factory called Thank You Chicago, and Felonious Monk. It's a small Felonious Monk who's like a Chicago icon, and he's an incredible writer, incredible performer. He will be headlining. Lisa Laird will be featuring. I'll be hosting. People should follow me on Instagram at Sonal Media. I always have stuff going on.
Sonal Agarwal. We will drop all of her links in the show notes. We appreciate you making time for CityCast Chicago.
Thank you for having me. Great seeing you.
Some good news. It's almost time for the winter flower shows, as both Snowflakes at Garfield Park Conservatory and Champagne Toast at Lincoln Park Conservatory open next Wednesday. Links for you in the show notes. Just remember, both are free but require advanced registration. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.